This video covers port numbers you need to recognize. We'll go through both IT ports that appear constantly in OT security discussions and the industrial protocol ports for the most common OT communication standards. Knowing these by number helps you read firewall rules, interpret network logs, and identify risky services in configuration audits, and recognize what's being described in a CISA vulnerability advisory when it says a vulnerability in the Modbus TCP implementation affects port 502. These are actual numbers that appear in your network every day, these port numbers. A few IT ports come up constantly in our OT security discussions, usually because they represent either a secure communication method or an insecure one. Port 22 is SSH, Secure Shell. This is encrypted remote command line access, and it's the secure replacement for Telnet. When you see port 22 in a firewall rule, it represents a managed encrypted remote access path. Port 23 is Telnet. Unencrypted remote access, credentials visible in plain text on the wire. This is one of the most dangerous services you can find on an OT network. We'll talk about it more in the next video. Port 3389 is RDP, Windows Remote Desktop Protocol. This provides a full interactive Windows session to a remote machine. It's heavily used for vendor remote support and for HMI access. It's also one of the most frequently exploited protocols in OT incidents, particularly when exposed to the internet. We'll cover the secure remote access model in Module 5. Port 80 is HTTP and port 443 is HTTPS, unencrypted and encrypted web traffic. Many OT devices have embedded web servers for configuration. Port 80 is particularly risky because it transmits credentials in plain text. If a PLC or switch has a web interface, it should only be reachable on port 443 and only from specific management hosts. Port 21 is FTP, File Transfer Protocol, which is unencrypted. In OT environments, FTP is often used for firmware updates and configuration backups. We'll cover why that's a serious risk in the next video. Industrial protocols have their own well-known ports. These are the numbers that appear in firewall rules specifically protecting OT systems. Port 502, as we've mentioned several times, is Modbus TCP. Modbus is one of the oldest and most widely deployed protocols for PLC communication, originally developed in 1979. Port 502 is where Modbus TCP listens on a device. A PLC with port 502 open is accepting Modbus commands. Port 44818 is Ethernet IP. This protocol is common in Allen Bradley and Rockwell automation systems. It's widely used in manufacturing for both PLC communication and drives. Port 44818 handles explicit messaging, TCP-based request response. Port 102 is S7 COM, used by Siemens S7 PLCs. If you operate Siemens equipment, this port is present on your PLCs. S7 COM was the target of the Stuxnet attack that we covered earlier. Port 20000 is DNP3. DNP3 is common in electric utilities and water systems. It was designed for serial communication over radio and telephone links and is now widely implemented over Ethernet in SCADA systems. Ports 161 and 162 are SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol, used for monitoring and managing network devices and many OT devices. SNMP uses UDP on both ports, 161 for queries to devices, 162 for traps, unsolicited alerts from devices to a management station. Finally, port 4840 is OPC-UA, or OPC Unified Architecture. This is the modern secure OT communication standard. Unlike legacy industrial protocols, OPC-UA has authentication and encryption built into the protocol specification. It's increasingly used for historian data collection, MES integration, and cross-vendor OT communication. If you have a choice between a legacy protocol and OPC-UA, OPC-UA is the one you should go with. Let's talk about some of the ports and which represent a higher security risk. SSH on port 22 is relatively low risk when properly configured. It's encrypted and supports key-based authentication. Telnet on port 23 and FTP on port 21 are high risk. Both transmit credentials and data in plaintext. RDP on port 3389 is high risk when accessible from untrusted networks. It's lower risk when restricted to internal use behind a VPN and/or a jump host. The OT ports 502, 44818, 102, and 20,000 are high risk when unrestricted, meaning if they're reachable from devices outside the operational zone. The issue isn't that these protocols are inherently broken, it's that they have no authentication. So any device that can reach the port can issue commands. Firewall rules that restrict access to these ports to only the specific sources that legitimately need them are essential. SNMP on ports 161 and 162 using versions 1 or 2C is high risk because of default community strings. SNMP v3 with authentication and encryption is a much better choice and lower risk. OPC-UA on port 4840 has better security characteristics than legacy OT protocols, but access should still be restricted to legitimate clients. The pattern is the same across all of them. Well-known port numbers are well known to attackers. Port 502 is in every OT-aware attack tool. Port 44818 shows up in vulnerability scanners targeting industrial environments. Port 102 was in Stuxnet. These aren't obscure findings, they're the first things an attacker tries. One important wrinkle in OT environments. Many older devices communicate over serial protocols. Modbus RTU, DNP3 over RS-232 or RS-485. These devices were built before Ethernet existed or was affordable, and we talked a little bit about serial in a previous video. Serial to Ethernet converters are also called protocol gateways or media converters. They take that serial traffic and wrap it in a TCP IP wrapping so it can traverse a network. From the SCADA server's perspective, it's pulling a Modbus TCP device. From the device's perspective, it's doing exactly what it's always done, sending data over serial connection. The security implication. The port number used by a serial to Ethernet converter depends on how it was configured, not on a standard. Some use port 502, some use port 503. Some use an arbitrary high port chosen during commissioning years ago. The actual protocol is still Modbus, but it won't appear on port 502 in your firewall logs. It will appear on whatever port the converter was set to. This matters because firewall rules written for port 502 or Modbus may miss these converted serial paths. When auditing your environment, check for serial to Ethernet converters, find out what ports they're using, and make sure those ports are just as tightly controlled as the standard well-known ports. In the next video, we'll go deeper on 3 dangerous legacy protocols: Telnet, FTP, and SNMP version 1 and version 2C. We'll explain exactly why they're risky and what an attacker can do with them and what to do about them.